We'll call the Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023 Planning Commission meeting to order. All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Changes to the agenda?
No, Chairman.
Roll call, please.
Chairman Saylor,
Here.
Commissioner Helmar. Here. Commissioner Pruitt, Commissioner Stoppenbrink, and Commissioner Hill.
Public comments under Government Code 54954.3. Members of the audience may address the commission on any item of interest to the public or on any agenda item before or during the commission's consideration of the item. State law prohibits the Planning Commission from acting on non-agenda items. Seeing none, we'll move right along to the information and consent calendar. We have 3 items. 2 items for approval of minutes from April 25th and May 9th, and then the 3rd item, Planning Commission review and approval of a 2.5-year extension of Planning Commission number CUP 21-06 for 1950 Mercantile Lane. If there's no need for discussion, the chair will entertain a motion.
I motion to approve.
Commissioner Helmer made the motion to approve. Does the motion have a second? Commissioner Hill made the second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Public hearings, 1 item. Planning Commission consideration of conditional use permit and modified site plan review, CUP 23-01, for the remodel of the retail building at 25 West Polk Street. Now, I do have one, since we already saw something on this building, not even 6 months ago or whenever it was, can we just get kind of the differences between what that project was and this?
Yeah, I'll
item?
summarize the report, and if there's any other clarification, I can definitely answer any clarifying questions.
Thank you.
But we'll give some history too. So on April 27th, oh, we got somebody that may not be muted. Are you able to mute them, Larry? Thank you. On April 27th, the City of Calinga received an application for conditional use permit, site plan review, and environmental review submitted by FIDC 66 LLC to convert 32,545 square feet of vacant retail space to a new Tractor Supply store, including 9,062 square feet of fenced outdoor display area, 3,000 square feet of trailer display area, 2,070 square feet of sidewalk display, and 3,698 square feet garden center. A second proposed retail use of 22,008 square feet, and the remaining 40,771 square feet as available retail space at the existing retail building at 25 West Polk. On September 27th of 22, the Planning Commission approved an application and adopted a resolution for site plan review, environmental review. There was a master sign program and a variance for the modification and remodel of the existing 100,000 square foot retail building at 25 West Polk, which we refer to as the old Kmart building, which included the approval of a new tenant multi-pylon sign and variance related to the height. The modifications in the site plan, including the CUP, is really related for the outdoor retail sales area, and that'll be addressed in this application and incorporated in conditions of approval from the previous approvals, where this application will subsequently supersede the original site plan approvals. The master sign program and variance will remain in effect from the prior approvals. They're looking to utilize that originally approved sign. They'll have tenant spaces in there. There may be a change in the name from Marketplace, but they're planning to use that existing approved sign standard. And then once the application was deemed complete, staff requested additional comments from the necessary city departments, and that's all been incorporated into this particular application. I kind of broke down the building space for the Tractor Supply and Garden Center, the proposed retail of the 22,008, and then they also have and then they'll have future available retail once they secure other tenants, within that 40,000. So that could be 2 more tenants, it could be 3, it could be 1. It just really depends on what the developers decide at that time to divide up that particular area. So in addition, obviously, in regards to the building components of the project, the applicant has proposed outdoor retail sales display areas. And so we have the fenced outdoor display, the permanent equipment and trailer display, and the sidewalk display. The general plan designation for the parcel is a retail center with a zoning designation of commercial retail center. And the purpose of the retail center zoning designations is to maintain areas for regional shopping centers located at major circulation intersections, large format or big box retail type stores. In terms of site plan review, we've gone through in the past in terms of what's required for site plan review. In accordance with 9-6.402, site plan review is required for all development projects within the city. The purpose of the site plan review is to enable the community development director and the planning commission to make findings that proposed development is in conformity with the intent of the provisions of the municipal code and guide the building official in the permit process. So in terms of analysis, the structure remains the same. The structure remains the existing 100,035 square feet. It will be remodeled in a different manner. We did provide some new elevations. There were some updated elevations based on the Tractor Supply elevation, and then kind of the standard elevation for the 40,000 or 22,000 square foot retail space. And then the future retail space, they'll use the existing elevation where the Kmart entry was prior. In terms of access remains the same. There's no changes to the existing access. So you have Forest, you have Polk, and Elm access. In terms of utilities still remain readily available for connection. So if they need gas, water, or sewer, those are all available for them. In terms of parking, the existing site currently accommodates 386 parking spaces. However, the proposed equipment and trailer display will reduce the available parking to 378. So they're going to utilize a small area. You can see from the exhibits that there's areas within the parking area that'll be taken up for that trailer display area. And so when we look at the parking requirement, retail from 10,000 to 50,000 square foot is a 1 per 400 square foot requirement, which then in turn requires 250 stalls. And then we require one ADA stall for every 25 stalls that are required, so which in turn runs to 10. So, and that's included in the 250. So basically it's still 250 parking spaces required with 10 for ADA. So they'll ensure when they revise the final and do their on-site improvements, they'll ensure that they have that adequate parking. In terms of landscaping, very similar to the previous approved project in terms of the improvements that need to be done to the dilapidated landscaping, improve those areas. There's not really going to be any new landscaped areas, but there will be, basically rehabilitation of a lot of the landscaping that's died over the course of the years that Kmart's been closed. And so it really hasn't been maintained all these years. And so we'll ensure through conditions of approval that they meet the current standard for the landscaping. That includes the parking areas as well. Do you have a question?
Is that who's working on the landscaping over there now? I've seen somebody over there mowing,
Probably not. That's probably weed abatement.
also it's probably the city or somebody.
No, it's probably the property owners. So the property owners are not the developers. So typically when these developments occur, an applicant will apply with the understanding that once they get their approvals, they'll be able to pull the trigger on buying the property. So at this point, the owners that are currently the owners are on the application as the owner, but the applicant is the developer. And so most likely it's the owner that may have received a notice. I can't confirm that, but they may have received a notice, or they're just cleaning the weeds that we've seen throughout town. And so for signage, as I mentioned earlier, the master sign program was approved in September of 2022. So those original approvals and all of the design standards for the master sign program will stay in place. So it still applies to new tenants. The size of the signage, the design criteria are going to remain in effect. If for some reason the developer wishes to change that, they would just come back to the commission for a revised use permit for the signage. So really the big change is the requirement of the conditional use permit. And the reason for the conditional use permit is for the outdoor retail sales. So as part of the Tractor Supply operations, they're requesting a conditional use permit to allow for the fenced outdoor display, the trailer displays, and the sidewalk displays. And so in accordance with the Planning and Zoning Code, a permanent outdoor display of merchandise, including merchandise, is allowed in association with an approved commercial use, but subject to a conditional use permit. And so essentially the Planning Commission shall only approve that conditional use permit. So that's why it's being brought to you tonight. So in terms of the, and it just has to make sure it meets the following standards, which one, outdoor sales shall be located entirely on the private property and have a 15-foot setback. It has to be screened either by decorative solid walls, landscaping, fencing. The property's essentially surrounded by landscaping, so that provides a natural buffer. And then the location of merchandise. Displayed merchandise shall occupy a fixed, specifically approved and defined location that does not disrupt the normal function of the site or its circulation and does not encroach upon parking spaces, driveways, pedestrian walkways, or required landscaped areas. These displays shall not obstruct site distances, otherwise create hazards for vehicle and pedestrian traffic. So as it relates to, it says that it can't encroach upon parking spaces. The intent of that is really, you don't want to encroach on parking spaces that where maybe you have just enough parking for that development. So if you need 10, but yet you need 3 for your outdoor display, that's where we have to have the discussion and say, well, okay, now we're only going to have 7 spaces on this property. In this case, you can see we had 386 and we only required 250. So there's plenty of parking for this site. So to eliminate these as part of the development and with the approvals going into effect, essentially it says that those parking spaces were not there and they're established as outdoor display. And so in terms of public notification, on May 11th, public notices were posted and mailed in accordance with state and local regulations. And as of the writing of this report, there were no written or verbal communication presented to staff related to the project. So with that, staff is making the recommendation and confirming that the findings for both site plan and conditional use permit can be found as they're identified in both the resolution and in the staff report. All the documents are attached, and the gentlemen from the development team are on the line if you have any questions. So you can definitely, I think it looks like Bill, I think, is the one that's here today. So if you have any questions for Bill.
Yes, I'm here.
He's more than happy to answer any questions. Other than that, this is a public hearing, and any
Yes,
questions?
this is a public hearing, so we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Anybody wishing to speak for or against this motion can do so when recognized by the chair. At this time, Commissioner Hill, do you have any questions?
Yeah, you talk about that fencing, the fencing that's already there. The fencing that's already there, where the garden section used to be, is that gonna be, are they gonna keep that up, or is that gonna be where some of the trailers and stuff will be going? Or are they gonna fence somewhere else?
So on the exhibit that's provided, there's if you look at the Tractor Supply layout, I think, it identifies specifically where the trailer areas will be, where the fenced-in outdoor area and the garden center will be located. And I'm sorry, Larry's probably killing me right now. The permanent trailer and equipment display area will be pretty much in front of the building, in that kind of first row of parking. If you can see along section 13, they'll have the garden center, which will be directly, probably almost at the farthest right, and then you have your outdoor display, your fenced-in area is going to be on that far right. But Bill might be able to explain exactly what modifications they might be doing to that area in terms of the fenced area compared to the garden center.
Well, yes, thank you. The fenced area, the only intention is to make the fence taller, so we'll probably simply reinforce the posts, bring them up to the 16 feet, which is Tractor Supply standard, and then, but the remaining masonry piers that run around the perimeter of that space would remain intact.
That's the garden area that's already there.
Correct.
Yeah, so they're going to be doing some.
The garden area that's already there, correct?
Yes, it is, sir. What we're going to do there is add some skylights, but we're just going to make it that it's the area that they would have some year-round sales of plants.
Okay.
Any other questions? Commissioner Helmer?
I have no questions.
Okay. My only question with the future development areas, I mean, I know that they look pretty bad as far as not being kept up, but is the city going to make them put in new turf or anything like that if in the future they're just going to be developed anyways?
Oh, you mean the paths?
Yeah, the pads, the triangle.
Well, as of right now, my understanding is the developers are looking to purchase basically and develop the old Kmart site and get the Tractor Supply. I would imagine in the future that might be the case. But yeah, we've never put any requirements on that
Okay, good.
to maintain, or I mean, it's really supposed to be maintained, but there hasn't been any requirements for having turf or anything like that in these vacant lots.
Okay, thank you. Anybody wishing to speak on behalf of this? Then we will move right along. We will close the public hearing. If there's no need for any further discussion, the chair will entertain a motion. Commissioner Hill made the motion to approve.
I second.
Commissioner Helmer made the second. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Hill? Aye. Commissioner Helmar?
Aye.
Chairman Saylor?
Aye. Motion carries. Moving right along to discussion and potential action items. One item, Planning Commission discussion related to the draft cycle. 6, multi-jurisdictional housing element.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioners. Tonight is an opportunity for the commission to receive a presentation from the City of Coalinga's consulting team, Placeworks, on the draft multi-jurisdictional housing element. And basically, we're seeking input from the Planning Commission prior to submittal to the State Department of Housing and Community Development. So this isn't a formal approval process at this point. It's basically reviewing the draft, providing comments prior to submitting to HCD for them to provide their comments, because they have a pretty long legislative review period that's been enacted. I think it's 60 days. Is that what it is, Lucy?
It's 90.
90. So we want to make sure that we have all everything in here before we submit it to them. Because if we submit it for 90 days and we get it back and there's any changes, I think they have another 30 or who knows how many days to review it again. And you're really under strict timelines to get these approved by the end of the year. So I know it's a big, daunting document. I know that some commissioners have been on the commission for quite some time, that even I think maybe Commissioner Hill, even in your absence, was involved in the previous cycle. So at least you guys are familiar with the documents. A lot of it changes just based on what the laws and regulations have changed. As you know, there's a lot of housing laws that have gone into effect in the last 3 to 5 years. And so these documents seem to get thicker and thicker, just like general plans do. And so tonight, we're just looking to seek some public comment from the public or from the commission. This will go to council next Thursday, and for the same process to seek more comments. And then at that point, we'll submit to HCD for review, and then we'll go through the formal hearing process once we get our review and comments back, as long as there's nothing crazy that we receive back. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Lucy. She's going to she has prepared a presentation to kind of give us an overview of the document per se, in less slides than the 300 pages that you received a while ago. And so this will kind of give you a good bird's eye view of the housing element, and then also a lot of some interesting demographics and interesting information about the City of Coalinga as well as it relates to housing, as we start looking at establishing our requirements for housing moving forward. So Lucy?
Great, thank you. Can everyone see the presentation on the screen?
Yes.
We can, yes.
Great, okay, just want to make sure. All right, I'm Lucy. I am a project manager with Placeworks, and I helped with the Coalinga's housing element as part of the multi-jurisdictional housing element. So thank you for that introduction. So as Sean said, it is just an overview. We're going to go over the details of the housing element. There will be some repeat if you were here last fall for that meeting. There'll be some repeat of that. The outreach that we conducted throughout the process, how we're going to meet the sites inventory, an overview of a new section, the housing element, which just helps to make it even longer, is the assessment of fair housing, go over the programs, and then wrap it up with a schedule. So the purpose for tonight is to provide an overview of the draft housing element to receive input prior to submitting to HCD, or the Department of Housing Community Development. So brief overview, we went over this last fall, but just as a recap, there are 8 mandated sections of the general plan, one of them being the housing element. The housing element must be updated every 8 years, and the adoption deadline for this cycle, the 6th cycle, will be December 31st of this year. So currently we're in the 5th cycle, and at the end of the year, we transition into the 6th cycle. And the whole purpose of the housing element is for Coalinga and each jurisdiction in the state to plan for their fair share of housing as it has been doled out. So the housing element contents, hopefully you had a chance to review it. It's a very lengthy document. There are 2 pieces for Coalingas. There's the regional document, which is the multi-jurisdictional housing element. And this was done as a collaborative effort with FCOG and most cities in the county, as well as Fresno County itself. So that includes an introduction, the public outreach and engagement that was done on a regional scale, the housing needs assessment, and this is really the details, those demographics of what is going on in your city as well as other cities in the county, the regional component of the fair housing, and then opportunities for residential development, constraints to residential development, and then goals and policies. These goals and policies are identical for every jurisdiction participating in the multi-jurisdictional housing element. So then we move on to just the piece for Coalinga, and that we go from the goals and policies to the action plan. So these are those actions that are specific to your city. However, one thing to note is that 99% of them are identical across each jurisdiction because there are a lot of similarities, a lot of collaborative efforts. The sites inventory, which is what everyone's interested in, the local piece of the fair housing, where we really dig into what's going on within the city, local housing constraints, so fees, things like that. And then a review of the last housing element and wrapping it up with a summary of the outreach that was done locally. So the outreach that was done throughout the whole process, both locally and regionally, started with stakeholder consultations last August. And these mean we reached out to organizations such as service providers, for homeless groups, lower income households, seniors, those types of populations, farm workers. We reached out to housing providers, all sorts of organizations that serve typically hard to reach communities, as well as ones that just serve the communities at large. And we asked them questions about housing need, barriers to housing, things like that. We found this is a really effective process because we get to have one-on-one conversations and really bring down the walls of what do they think is actually going on. Last fall, we met with you for the joint meeting. We had the community workshop last October. There were 3 focus group meetings with those stakeholders, which was then a roundtable discussion, bringing it all together. The last one was held about a month ago. And then tonight we're here to present the draft. Oops, excuse me. So the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA, this is your sites inventory. So the way this works is the state every 8 years looks at the projection of what population growth they expect statewide. They then divide that up by the Council of Government. So they gave FCOG about 58,000 units and said, we're anticipating if things go as planned, there will be a need for housing for 58,000 housing units. And then locally, the jurisdictions talk and work that out, and Coalinga's RHNA was about 566 units. So as you can see on this slide, that accounts for about 1% of the total FCOG allocation, which is similar to many jurisdictions. Of course, Fresno County has the largest. So what is the RHNA? The RHNA means identifying opportunities for development should development occur. The city is not in the business of building housing, but the RHNA is to identify that there's suitable land should developers come forward. And the way this works is the state, or HCD, says you need to identify suitable land for various incomes of housing. So very low and lower income are those less than $62,000 a year households for a 4-person household. The state has said that land that is suitable for affordable housing for these income groups must allow at least 20 units an acre. And that's just a statewide designation for certain types of jurisdictions. So many jurisdictions in Fresno County fall into that. It says typically an affordable housing developer needs about that density to support affordable development. Then we have moderate income households, sort of that middle income, and that's slightly lower density, but not all the way single family lowest density. And then we have above moderate income, which are those market rate units, typically lowest density, really single family homes. And so it's doled out. We have 157 very low income units, 96 low, 89 moderate, and 224 for the above moderate category. When we looked at the sites inventory, we start by looking at sites that were included in your fifth cycle housing element and carrying over any that have not been developed yet. So that will be the bulk of the sites. Next, we look at whether there are any pipeline projects that are in the works, sort of on the horizon for the next 8 years. And for Coalinga, we don't have any of those, which makes our sites inventory a little bit simpler. When we look at the sites, we're typically looking for sites between 0.5 acre and 10 acre, because again, the state has said that those are the sites that are most likely to develop for lower income housing, because they need a little bit more land for the higher density product. And then we look at both vacant and underutilized sites. We don't have any we have one underutilized site, I apologize, in the inventory. And I'll go into that site in a minute. And then finally, we looked at any accessory dwelling units. So this map is in the housing element. So a brief summary of it is, as you can see, almost all of the capacity identified to meet your RHNA is on vacant sites. So those are going to be the lowest hanging fruit for their sites inventory. There's also one site, site 4, sort of in the middle of your screen here. The larger portion of it, the 3 acre site, is an underutilized site. It does have 2 single family homes, but given the size of the parcel, is anticipated that an additional 12 homes could be added to it. Again, this is not guaranteeing anything's built. It's just that the opportunity is present. So then, like I said, we don't have any pipeline projects for this. So the next step is ADUs. The city did permit 27 ADUs in 2021. And while that is a lot, we want to be fairly conservative because trends change, people build more, people build less. So we've anticipated 8 ADUs to be permitted over the next 8 years. So 4 of those for above moderate, 4 for moderate income. But something to keep in mind here is, while we've taken a conservative approach, we're projecting fewer ADUs. Should it increase, you can count every ADU that is permitted towards your RHNA. So just because it's not part of the inventory doesn't mean it can't be counted. So bringing it all together, we have the income categories in the RHNA on the left side of the screen, your capacity on vacant sites, underutilized sites, and ADUs in the middle. And that brings you to your total capacity in sort of that beige color. And the surplus column, and that is what's really important here. So we want a surplus on your inventory. We want to have identified greater capacity for units than your RHNA, because SB 166 requires that should a developer come forward and choose to develop at a lower income or a higher income than you had identified your site for, there's still additional capacity. So you have a ton of capacity for lower income housing right now, which is great. So if a developer came forward, picked up one of your sites and said, I'm putting 30 above moderate income units here instead, you're fine. You still have 231 units available, or capacity for those units available. So you have to maintain capacity throughout your planning period. So there's a very large surplus here, so it's in good shape. So the assessment of fair housing, as I mentioned, is a brand new section. So I just want to provide an overview of what we look at here. There's a lot that goes into this section. If you read it, it is very data heavy. It is very lengthy. We look at a variety of factors. So we look at demographic and socioeconomic conditions. We compare that to housing needs. So are people living in overcrowded households, which means they have more than, by the definition, they have more than one person per room living in the house. A lot of times this is due to larger families or higher housing costs. We look at homelessness patterns. We look at access to transit, access to schools, access to jobs, all of those things, and how they all sort of combine for patterns within the city. Some of the findings that we found, and these are not unique, we found it throughout the county, displacement risk for lower income residents. So just as throughout the state, housing costs are rising, it becomes less affordable for some lower income households. So we identified several programs to address housing need. Disproportionate need for persons with disabilities. So a shortage of supportive units, transit connectivity, accessibility modifications. Again, we've identified programs to make sure that the city is in compliance with state law and has opportunities available. And then finally, limited access to service and resources. Just given the location of the city within Fresno County, this happens. But we have a program in place. I keep saying that, but a program in place to address that as well. So the programs. So the next big piece that everyone's interested in is the housing programs. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the goals and policies are going to be identical across all of the jurisdictions participating in this process. And then there are 30 programs that are specific to Coalinga. All of these programs were either carried over from your fifth cycle, continued, modified slightly as needed to address state law, or are new programs that we identified to address findings of the housing element, public input received, or new state law that has come up during the last 8 years. So I'll start with those. It's fairly text heavy, but essentially what this means is program 15 is zoning amendments, is we reviewed the zoning code for the city of Coalinga and identified areas where in the past 8 years, there has been new legislation that has come out that changes are needed to address that. These are non-optional. It's just bringing it into compliance to make sure housing is available as is required by the state. So the first one is farm worker employee housing. For smaller farm worker units, making sure that's treated as a single family unit, single family use, excuse me. For larger ones, treated as an ag use. Transitional and supportive housing are required. These are for housing for persons with disabilities typically, are required to be treated as a single family use. So those are the first two that come up in that. And then on the next slide, we have 3 more. So low barrier navigation centers. These are relatively new in the last 2 or 3 years. It's just another type of emergency shelter with wraparound services for homeless residents. Single room occupancy units are targeting extremely low income households to reduce costs, and residential care facilities it's sort of hand in hand with that transitional and supportive housing, a similar type of unit. So 2 different laws. We have program 4, so that's SB 166. I mentioned it on the slide that we summarized all the site capacity, is just making sure that there's enough land throughout enough suitably zoned land throughout the planning period to meet the RHNA. And with the surplus, that's not an issue, that we do have a program in place to make sure that continues to be the case. And then AB 686 is the legislation that required us to conduct the assessment of fair housing. So that is why that is included in this, and 2 programs specifically to address the findings that I mentioned. So making sure there's eliminating any potential for housing discrimination, there's resources available for residents on the city's website, and then improving access to resources. So the new programs altogether, program 3, homeless and unhoused housing needs. This is a program that is the same across all the jurisdictions participating in this process, because homelessness is a regional problem and not necessarily impacting your jurisdiction more than others. So just making sure there are resources available in the county and you can point residents to them should they need that. That's the intent of this program. Farm worker preference, that's addressing fair housing, extremely low income households. Environmental hazard mitigation is a new one that's required by the state as well to address the flood risk by FEMA. So most of these we went over. SB 330, SB 35, objective design standards, all of those are just new programs required. Then reasonable accommodations is to make sure there's a process in place for residents that need an accommodation for their site to accommodate a disability. So for example, if someone needed to add a ramp to their house, but it would infringe on the setback, the reasonable accommodation process would address that. So the next couple slides are continued and modified programs, so you'll recognize them from your 5th cycle. We brought them over, we updated the timelines, just made sure the language was current. So all of these are for that. And that brings us to our schedule. So we released the public review draft on May 10th, and that is open for public review for residents, stakeholders, yourself, and that will go through June 9th. And during that window is when we meet with you, obviously, and then next week we meet with City Council. At the end of that period, so starting on June 10th, we will review any public comments received, incorporate as needed, and before submitting to the state on June 26th. So the goal is to complete the review in the first 90-day period. Should the state want to do a second review period, so they have some comments, we address them, we submit again, that is a 60-day review period. So we've built that time into the schedule to have all of that done by the end of the year so that we can adopt in January. So that sort of would bring us to the end of the process. But that sums up everything. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It does It does clarify several things. Commissioner Hill, do you have any questions?
On that one where it says,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have my mic
There we go.
on. Where it says 0.5 to 10 acres,
Yeah.
we just had somebody rezone for 10 acres, the Griffin land. Would that be considered in with this program?
So it's,
could it?
it's not a property identified in the inventory. The inventory really is just to identify sites to satisfy your RENA. But there's obviously other sites in the city that are either zoned for residential high density, or like in that case, it's zoned single-family residential. So it's at the acres, it's 10 acres, but the density for single-family is lower than 0.5 to 10. So it's just based on, you have your zoning, and you have the size of the property, which then based on the density of that in that zone, that can determine how many units you can potentially build on that site. But it's not necessarily in the inventory, because a lot of single-family residential, it's pretty easy to satisfy in the inventory because we've got a lot of land for single-family. But as you see, the bulk of the number in our arena is for affordable housing. And so typically the state sees it as higher density, as Lucy was saying, like 20 units to the acre. So you have to be more in the high-density land use zoning designations. So like areas across the street from the college, that's high-density residential. Where the Pacific Apartments are being built right now, that's a high-density residentially zoned property. So it's all based on the zoning map on what we have and where we have them. In our case, as you can see, we have a big surplus of land available to accommodate all income levels. Where in other jurisdictions, some jurisdictions don't have enough land,
Right.
which then they have to go and rezone property to higher density. So you can imagine some of the controversy, one, that could cause, and two, the city is then forcing a density change on a piece of property, which doesn't always go over well. Or because you can't annex property and then use that land. It has to be something that's within the existing city limits. But we're in pretty good shape because we do have a lot of surplus land available to satisfy the requirement of the housing element.
Okay, I was just wondering, because I know, because of what took place on that land, and it does have that apartment being built next to it.
Yeah, so the apartments are built on high-density residentially zoned land. The property that you're talking about is directly adjacent, and that's all zoned single-family residential.
Okay.
And
Just
one thing
asking.
I'll add is that, so that half an acre to 10 acres is what the state says is most likely to develop with affordable housing. But when we're talking single family housing, they don't have acreage restrictions on it.
Yeah, and the last two apartments that are being built, the two that are under construction now, they're on 5 acres.
I noticed that, one of the statements here is, while rent is relatively low and rental units are available in Coalinga, is that still true? My experience in talking to people who are trying to move here, not necessarily to buy a home, but to rent, is that it's very, very limited and getting really pricey.
Lucy, do you know what
I-
data? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I can pull up the data from, because we have that in the fair housing section, and I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can pull it up if you would like.
Okay, it's more the question of availability, because it just seems like something goes on the market and it's snapped up, before it's
So
actually even.
our findings were that generally demand exceeds supply, and that housing costs are increasing. It's all relative to the areas around you. So there is available land or available housing, and it is relatively affordable compared to other places in the state, but it has still increased, and there is more demand for housing in general.
Okay, thank you. And then just some of my other questions were relative to specific language or charts where there seemed to be conflicting information or repeated. I mean, like there were some tables where Coalinga was listed 3 times. So I don't know what cities we replaced, but I don't know if you want to go over those, or you want me to just email those.
I mean, if it's just more of maybe an issue with just formatting, or if there's some
Formatting
information where you're
or-
noticing that, we can definitely probably, if you want to email me that, we can
I
do
can do
that.
that,
That's not a
yeah.
problem.
Yeah, we can fix those, no problem.
Right. Yeah, those were my questions, and I'll just send you
Yeah,
this.
just shoot them over to me and then I'll send them over to Lucy
Okay.
and Cynthia.
Will do. Thank you.
I don't have anything.
No questions?
I don't have any
All
questions. I think, well, I do have a comment. I think the state legislature has had a little bit too much time on its hands, and it's not going to be able to legislate. Well, anyways,
Yeah,
I was here for the last housing element, and just the difference. It's
I do.
It
have one
is
more
significantly different.
yes.
What kind of feedback do you get from HCD, or do you?
Oh, we do get a lot of feedback from HCD. They will have comments. We are anticipating, because this is a multi-jurisdictional effort, so most of the jurisdictions will be coming in fairly quickly. We do know who our reviewers will be with the state, which is fortunate. So we've been able to converse with them and address some of their issues. Some of the things we expect from them are going to be regarding farm worker housing and just general need for lower income housing and a variety of options. And not necessarily for Coalinga, but as you mentioned, the sphere of influence unit. So there are a few jurisdictions that are trying to rely on sites in the sphere of influence. So I anticipate that being a focus of theirs and sort of drawing away from other issues as well. But it's really, it's a luck of a draw. Their comments change every time. They will have fair housing comments. They typically want clarification, but we've addressed all of the comments. So we've addressed all of their comments we've received on other housing elements for this housing element, and are hoping we've checked all the blocks, but they usually have clarification questions. They want to know more about your sites, things like that.
Thank you.
Makes sense.
but we still are in a good position. Even I was getting more and more nervous this cycle because of the inventory, but they've done a good job about identifying locations and sites. So it looks like even with surplus and based on our historical build outs, I think we'll be good for future cycles as well, but we don't know what can change on us. But it looks like we're in pretty good shape in terms of not having to do a rezone program or anything like that, with trying to establish more sites. We have plenty of sites available, so.
Good. Good. You're good.
All right.
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Lucy.
thank you. And if you email over those,
Thank you.
the errors you saw, we'll get those fixed.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thanks,
Take
Lucy.
care.
Thank you.
Department reports.
I have none, Chairman.
Okay. Staff announcements? None?
None.
You have an announcement?
Well, don't forget Horn Toad Derby.
Very true. Very
Starts
true.
Friday.
Stay safe, everyone. Meeting adjourned.